All right, I want to run an experiment. So a few months ago, maybe 1 or 2 months ago, I run into this blog post which poses the question, can AI generate high quality code by Alex Brown? And it's a question that I've been asking myself and I've been asked before. So in the experiment to go through his takeaways, AI generated code functions but often lacks structure and clarity. Implementing TDD enhances readability, maintainability, modularity. Even AI exhibits caution in refactoring without tests, mirroring human behavior. Um, this experiment indicates that while AI can produce functional code, applying TDD significantly improves its quality. I'm a huge proponent of TDD myself. Now, I do have a blog post where when people ask me if TDD is something that I do all the time, I say, well, it depends. So you can check out this post later. Um, but while I do not do TDD all the time, and then I have some reasons as I described in this post, BDD I do all the time. So what I've been thinking about doing is running this experiment here, but instead of approaching it from a TDD perspective, I want to change the approach and approach it from a BDD, behavior-driven design or development perspective. So let's see what's going to happen here. Uh, Essentially, what was it, Alex? Yes, Alex did here was to take the prime numbers kata prime factors kata, right? To write and then prompt ChatGPT in this case to run an implementation and then applying TDD and following through to see what happened with that. So that was his experiment. Please check out because it's interesting to see the background there. What I'll do is approaching from a BDD perspective. This is how it's gonna this is how it's gonna go. Let's pretend that I know nothing about prime factors, right? So what I want to do is I want to use ChatGPT to create user stories for me with acceptance criteria in the shape of gherkin, given when then, and start there. Because I want to, before thinking whether AI can generate high quality code, I want to know if AI can help me solve a problem. And once we have the problem solved, then we look at the code and think, how can we make the code better? And there are ways to do that. I've been applying that on a daily basis, but I want to run through this experiment to see, like from scratch, what it would look like. So here's what I'm going to do. I've looked up a Prime Factors Kata PDF here, right, which has information about it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab that PDF. I'm going to launch, oops, not the emoji. I'm going to launch the ChatGPT thing here. And I'm going to actually say, I want you to generate user stories and acceptance criteria to solve the problem of generating prime factors kata. I'm giving you a PDF with that, with more details about that problem. That's a problem we're going to be trying to solve. I will also give you links to blog posts where I describe how I like user stories written, as well as my given when then uh, statements. With that, write me the user story, the acceptance criteria, and the scenarios according to what I'm giving you. So I like doing that because it's for me it's better than typing because it makes me think a little bit more to articulate what I'm trying to do. So it transcribed that for me. I'm going to give that PDF. As I mentioned, I have a few blog posts where I talk about how I like user stories written and why I like it in that manner. So I really start with the why and then how. Um, and let me move this over and then this and then this one for given one dance. And let's see what's going to happen. Isn't loading on my end. Uh-oh. Could you upload the PDF? Okay. Let me grab that PDF. I can save it. We need the downloads. In. There we go. All right. Yeah, works. But I can get to the save button. There we go. All right. Let's go here. Gonna pull that up another screen to just make it easier for me to move things. I'm gonna have some other things here as well. There we go. And it didn't say anything about the blog post. I'm gonna give it again just to make sure. There we go. PDF contents, reviewed your blog post previously. Cool. So I'm familiar with your style of writing user stories. Here's a draft of the user story, acceptance criteria, and all that. Decompose an integer into its prime factors. Purpose to enable mathematical decomposition of integers. As a developer practicing TDD, I want a function that accepts a positive non-zero integer and returns a list of prime factors so that I can ensure the system can accurately break down numbers for educational, analytical, or validation purposes. Very well explained, right? Notice that there's no as a user. It's a little bit more specific what kind of user and what that user is trying to accomplish. Acceptance criteria, valid input, single prime. When the input is prime number, the function returns a list. Valid input, composite number. Input is composite number, yada, yada, yada. Valid input. When the input is 1, the function returns an empty list. Powers of a prime. So it looks like it went through that document, created acceptance criteria based on that. Scenarios. Input is 1. Given I have a function that decomposes integers into prime factors, when I pass the number 1 to it, then it returns an empty list. Scenario 2. Input is a prime number. Given I have a function that decomposes integers into prime factors, yada, yada, yada. Okay? So it's covering a whole bunch of scenarios here. Very nice. Cinematic aspect. So that's one of the things that I talk about in one of my blog posts. For clarity and storytelling, actors, developer as a user, the function as the actor performing the decomposition, setting, isolated function under test-driven development, plot, starting from trivial cases, one and primes, and building complexity with composites and powers of primes, hook, emphasize small incremental steps in TDD to avoid jumping to complex numbers too soon. Would you like me to include code samples for the given when-then scenarios as well, or expand on edge cases? I don't want you to do that. So if I was gonna be using ChatGPT to write the code, then yeah, I could say, yeah, go ahead and do that. But what I'm gonna do with that, I'm gonna copy that content and I'm gonna switch over to, let me get ChatGPT out of the way here. I'm gonna be using Cursor to actually do the coding part of it. I had just before I started recording here, asked Cursor to create a .NET Core test project that uses XUnit for experiments. It created a project for me. I've been using Cursor for the what I call the macro AI generation, using the agent and all that. But for the actual working with the code and running tests and project navigation, I use a Rider. So I'm going to be flipping between the two. So Cursor created this test project and this test class to just make sure that everything is wired up. So we have that here. Perfect. What I'm going to do now is over here, I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call docs like that. And then here, a new file, story markdown. Oh, I'm going to ask also ChatGPT here. Give me that content in markdown format. Just so that when I paste it over there, it's makes it easier to work with that. All right, get this out of the way again. And this guy here, there we go. All right, because then if I do want to see like that, see it formatted, looks fine. Okay, and we don't need that part. All right, so here, I'm gonna create a new chat. It has the story as part of the context. What I'm gonna tell it is write unit tests following a BDD style, even when then write unit tests following BDD styles for this story. Do not implement the test or functionality yet, as I want to review the tests first. Go ahead and do that. So this is something else that I've been doing, right? Instead of just telling AI to go ahead and write all the code, create everything, give it a task, and then get something out of it that you can review as a human, and then refine that if you feel it needs refining, and then you can go ahead and tell AI, okay, good, go ahead and do the rest of the things there. Something else that I've been also doing is to ask Cursor to look at the user story, look at the scenarios, and propose edge cases or other scenarios that I may be forgetting or may not be considering. So it tells me it created the tests. Let's have a look at it. What did it do? Interesting. Okay, so it did give them one then in this format, which is not exactly how I personally like it, but we can work with that. Let's have a look at it. Okay. Decompose, factors, decompose. So something that I don't like is that it wrote the test with the given one then embedded in the test name, and then it uses arrange acts assert, um, which is something that I'm not a big fan of. Um, I'll drop this, right, test style to add to the things we are looking at here. I would love it for it to change the style. Let me see if I can grab Let's see what it's gonna do with the following. I have another post here, BDD, TDD, differences between TDD and BDD. Here, I have an example that shows BDD up here, TDD here. Let's see if it can do something about that. Let's see. I'm going to copy that image. Let's drop it. Let me move my face out of the way here. Give the image. See image. I'd like the tests written in the BDD style shown in that image. Okay. And my point here is that like writing the test name in BDD style, it's not really doing BDD in the way that I prefer doing it. And I like having that split where we have BDD to describe the problem and TDD to implement how we're going to solve that problem or the API exposed to solve that problem. So see, use Nate case and all that. Okay, this is pretty nice, right? So it created, and this is, yeah, this is more like it. This is the style that I favor. Naming the test method after the the scenarios that come from the user story, right? So we have the different scenarios there. So I like naming the test after the scenario and then seeing the lines within the test as my given when thence, because that's how we got the user story. So that's much better. Given number one, when decomposing, return an empty list, prime number decomposition, given prime, and all that. I like that it still uses the inline data to parameterize the test. That is pretty sweet. Yeah, I like it. Um, I like it. Things like this, um, I would push it to the bottom, but I'm gonna apply some of these refactorings later. I'm gonna accept this file right now because I like the way it's going with that. Okay, good. All right. Now let's go ahead and design the uh, let's go ahead and design the API for the what's it called, for the Prime Factors class. Do not implement it yet. I want to review it. Oh, one, not one. So this would be kind of like the TDD aspect of it, where we already have a little bit of that because it did, oh yeah, you're going to have a decompose method there. So it's kind of a contrived example. I've done something like this in more complex scenarios, and then it's kind of following this, like show me what kind of API you would have to serve, right? So we're TDDing the implementation of the BDD um, style problem that we're trying to solve. So let's see what it did here. We need to create a project file for the main library. Excellent, right? So it's not even doing it in the test projects, which sometimes as a human I do. I just drop it in the test project if it's only logic that's contained there. make the test pass, and then later I pull it into a separate project. In this case, it's already proposing we do that. I'm totally fine with that because that's where we would end up anyways. Class structure, where it's located, method signature, decompose, the number, return type, it's returning that type, allows for flexibility, right? So that's pretty good. At this point, I would, if I wanted to say, oh, instead of returning IEnumerable, I want to return list or array of integers. This would be the TDD part. So there's that collaboration between AI and human, because it's the human that's going to be maintaining this code later. That's why I wouldn't want to have AI just like, oh yeah, go to town, do whatever. I would say, no, hold on, I want to review it. And here, with that being said, for this problem where let's pretend that I'm the developer who's going to be maintaining this later, so I do want to have a say over the API design for this. Depending on the problem, maybe I would just want to say, just implement the thing. As long as the tests, the BDD tests are covering the problem that you're trying to solve the problem for me, however you can do it. Let me see the problem solved, and maybe that's where I need to stop, because maybe it's a problem that I just need to solve it once and move on, and not worry about the quality of the code that solves the problem. But in this case, let's assume, yeah, I'm going to be maintaining this later. I want to make sure that it's good code. So I'm going to accept that. And I'm going to say that sounds great. Um, and here's something else. Create in the same folder where the story is defined a markdown file that documents the decisions for this API. Right, so if you're in a project where APIs, like public APIs, need to be documented and the reasoning behind them have to be documented, get AI to do that part, right? Because then that becomes documentation that stays with the project, right? So it went ahead, created that. Okay, let's see, what does that look like? This document outlines the key decisions made when designing the API for the prime factors. There's that, design decision, static class, implemented static, this and that. Instance class, rejected as unnecessary. Extension method, this and that. Right, so this is a moment where the human can look over that and say, I agree with all of this, or no, there are things here I don't agree. So you could either, like I could either go in and change the document directly, or I could continue the conversation and say, hey, you know, error handling. What about we do this instead of that other thing? Or maybe we can ask further questions to refine the requirements, drop it there. Depending on what comes out of it, we may want to say, update the user story with the new findings that we have just discussed. So you continue this collaboration. I will assume that we are good with what we have. I'll say that's pretty good. Let's go ahead, implement the code, and run the tests to make sure they pass. And see what comes out. Right, so it's implementing the code. Let's run the test to see if they pass. All right. It has built successfully and it has passed all 19 tests. Beautiful. Let's fix the warning, properly initializing the factors. Good, right? So it found out, hey, there are some warnings like lint uh, errors. It figured that out, like let's fix it. And once we've fixed it, let's rerun the tests, make sure we didn't break anything, right? Pretty good. So let's see. Yeah, did that. Let's see over here what it did. Yeah, the proper initialization of things. Good. All right. Cool. Let's hop over here. As I said, I prefer uh, Writer to see the tests, to work with the code. Um, let's see the tests. Nice. Yeah, tests look pretty clean, but I'm gonna actually ask it to refactoring a little bit. I don't understand why it's not showing. We should have a different project. Why is it not showing the project here? That's interesting. So it didn't include project. This guy. Huh. Wonder why it's not showing. Oh, guess let's ask. It looks like the library project hasn't been added to the solution. Mhm. Good. And it reruns the test. Nice. Very good. There you go. Now it shows up here. Let's see. I want to check. Oh, that's a. See how um, code comment show up in my IDE? And here it's using the XML comment. That is okay. I have a whole blog post about that as well. Code comment. If you're curious, like my take on commenting code, and there's a video version there if you want to check out as well. But that's fine. Then beyond that, like we can review the code. If we don't like the code that was generated, we can either refactor it ourselves or tell cursor, nudge it in a way that it will move towards what we want. Now, again, this is too contrived of an example. Like it's a small problem domain to really exercise TDD. Because TDD, like in this case, oh yeah, you have one class that has one method that performs a thing. There's only so much it can help you with, but that's the approach I would take with that. Something that I'm more specific about is the way that the tests are. So for one thing, uh, like notice that I've set my IDE to show dead code, and like private is considered dead code because it's the default modifier, member modifier in C sharp, meaning it's not necessary. But cursor does not know about that. So I'll say, help me create some instructions um, about how I want C sharp and C sharp code code written, and tests organized. Create a new Markdown file in the docs folder for that. For C Sharp, do not add the private modifier to any member. That is the default, so it should be considered that code. For tests, split tests uh, into multiple files. One file per scenario. Extract any common code into a base class called context and have the other files inherit from it. Another thing that I'm particular about is to have the given, when, then methods below. So it's already doing that, but to have any members defined all the way to the bottom. Because when I'm reading a test, I don't want to see that first. I want to see my given one, then the given one, the implementations, and then at the bottom, I can see whichever members are supporting that test. And this is how I do in tests specifically. So put all fields at the bottom of the file. Go ahead and do that. Coding standards. I like it. So this would be equivalent to the cursor rules, except that instead of working as cursor rules, I'm just creating a separate markdown file that I will specifically add to the context when I need it. So like in real world projects, I would use the cursor rules for something that I always want the agent to use, like the C# style guide, for instance, not use private, for instance. That I just want everywhere. That I would likely put in a cursor rule. For things that are domain specific or things related to the architecture and the technical details of that specific project, I've been adding those to markdown documents that I will then add to context uh, of the agent when necessary. All right. So notice that this collaboration, right? So I'm collaborating with AI here to create instructions to be reused later. So next time I ask it to create um, tests, it will know that, hey, if I give you a user story like this with the following acceptance criteria, and I tell it to create tests, this is how you should create and structure the tests. So now it's not going willy-nilly writing tests however it wants. It's actually following my standards or the team standards, the company standards, and taking it from there. Same thing with the implementation of code, right? I may have certain opinions and patterns that we follow that I want AI to follow, as opposed to just go out and use the model to figure out what to do. So it created the document coding standards, C# code standards, avoid redundant access modifiers such as private. It created examples. Naming conventions, use Pascal case for public, prefix private fields with underscore, use nouns, yada yada yada, code organization, group members by type, and this and that. It's doing like more than I told it to do, but I like some of the things that it added. Keep files focused on single responsibility. Love it. Test organization. Split the tests. Context. Field placement. BDD style. Example test structure. Fields at the bottom. Okay. I like it. And it also went ahead. So let's accept this file, review the next one. Notice it already went ahead and refactored the existing tests to the new instructions. So I like that. I like that. I don't like the adding comments here. So it's something else that I'm going to add it to the instructions because like fields at the bottom, I don't want to see that in my tests or common initialization. Don't do that. uh, but I'm going to tell it in another instruction, in another pass. Input scenario, yada yada yada. Right, so it's pretty much going through every single one of those. They all look pretty good. And then last but not least, what did it do here? Okay, remove this, that. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, let's go over here. And I want to look at the test. Right, so the context, we have seen that before. I would look at the squigglies, suggested name. Yeah, no. Like things like that. I agree with a writer. Like it should use collection expression, right? Um, Here's some things like I don't want these things. This it can be made protected. Notice that here it complains because it violates the common C# style guideline. But for tests, I don't care. I'm not. This is C# code that I use to express behavior and requirements. So I don't follow the the common C# rules. So and here, why do I want to have underscore context so that it shows as the first file within that project? Because also here I would organize these tests in a separate folder based on the feature that we are creating. So here's what I'll do. I'm gonna go ahead and say inspection. I want to disable that in a file. I don't want to be bothered by that anymore. So it added this thing here, and ReSharper or Writer will not complain about that anymore. I've changed that initialization here already. I want to look through some of the other files. Right, so this is how I like seeing things. And then I'm gonna go ahead and create a folder, right? Decomposing is the feature. And then I wanna move these files, move to folder, decomposing. When we do that, it messes up the namespace. Oh no, I did using the tool, so it put it with the right namespace. So if I'm learning about a feature, I want to find the test for that feature, and then within that folder, I want to see the different files for the different scenarios. The context will tell me anything I need to know, like, oh yeah, this is the main class that implements that feature. I could see that here, like in the when decomposing. That's the main thing. Like it's the design of this thing that if I'm doing TDD, I'm concerned with. What does it look on the way in, on the way out? Um, and then for each one of those scenarios, at the top, I see the scenario, which pretty much maps to our user story. And then the given, the then part, they are there, good. Input one scenario, even distribution, and that, and that, and that. Okay, that looks pretty good. There's still something else that I change. Like I don't really see any reason for the name of the class to follow the Pascal case common C# guideline. So what I want is for this guy to be renamed to use snake case, like that, right? And then when I do that, yep, it complains because that's not inconsistent naming. I'll say I don't care about that because I like reading it like this. My style, I know a lot of C# developers hate doing this. Sorry, that's my BDD accent coming through when I write my tests and when I express those tests using C#. Um, okay, so I did that. Now, I don't want to go through everything here. When I do things like this, I go over to AI and check this out. I've made a few changes to the code folder organization, um, test, class, naming, etc. Update the um, the standards instructions and the apply similar changes to the remaining files. All right, so this experience is like you're working with maybe a junior dev or a new dev that's you're onboarding to your team. You ask the person to do to accomplish a task. You see the result back. Instead of saying, "Oh, you're doing this all wrong. This is what you should do." No, you look at what was done, you make minor corrections, you explain what those corrections are, and then you ask the person, go ahead and update instructions so that the next time you have those instructions handy, you can look at it, and then we don't have to go through the same iteration. We can look at, other areas of improvement. And that's what we are doing here, right? So we're getting AI to do that. So notice it's already updated the standards, right? So let's look at the updates here. Yeah, feature-specific directories. Yeah, snake case for the files, adding the disable inconsistent naming at the top, the way to restructure the file or to name the files. Good, good. Yep, use C#12 collection expressions where appropriate. So it picked up on that change, right? Yep, now it updated the example as well. And then I'll accept that, go to the next file. So it's renaming. Let's go through each one to see. Yep, it's pretty much just renaming the files and adding the note at the top. There we go. Yeah, that was it. Outstanding, right? So they are named properly. It did not rename the file, right? So the file should be renamed as such. So I failed to mention, besides renaming the test class, we need the files also named like the class. Update instructions and rename files. Right? So you take your time. You don't just tell AI, go ahead and go wild and do things. If the code generated is something that the team, the humans are going to be maintaining going forward. So you collaborate with AI, you give it instructions, you tell it to do things, you see what it does, you see what comes back, you give further instructions, you tell it to update the instructions, right? And apply that, like try it out already on what's pending in the solution. You make changes, you tell it, look at the changes that I've made, ask me any questions you might have, right? Or ask me anything that I may be forgetting to tell you, and then work with that collaboration, right? So it's let me close all of this because it did update all those files. Let's see, right there, right? So it updated that in the instruction, and it renamed the files accordingly. That's the way I like it. Yeah. So that was it. That is my experiment of guiding or training AI without having to train models or anything. This is really just creating instructions that we can give whichever model um, you're using with your AI agent so that the agent knows what to do based on your instructions. So to summarize it, we used ChatGPT to create the user story, right? Following the standard that we want for the reasons we want that. We code AI, we used AI to create tests following a BDD style for that story. We told it to create the API, so TDD, the API that will give us that behavior that we described in the story. And in the tests, we revised that. Then we told it to implement the story, the code. All tests are passing, good. We got instructions created, flushed out. Now those instructions are part of the project. So if we were to create a new story and tell it to implement something, we would come in here and say, yep, new chat, add the story that you want to implement, grab that document and say, hey, we have some coding standards and we have some, not that, right? Coding standards. That's all we need. And then go ahead and say, write the tests, write the this, do the that. It's already there with your instructions, and it would know what to do. So that's part of my experiment. I may continue with this experiment or similar later, maybe with a different kind of problem domain that just like a more complex, or not necessarily like complex, like a more real world type of problem that we're trying to solve, but going through the same kind of exercise, working with AI to then do the thing that's gonna make the implementation faster so that we can get to the problem solution faster, but also getting the right solution, doing the right thing the right way. BDD, TDD, clean code, following the patterns that you may have in your solution, and so on. That was fun.